Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I want to talk about the trailer that came out today at the time of me recording this of Venom, Let There Be Carnage. If you haven't seen it already, I'll include a link to it in the description down below. But first and foremost, let's talk about Tonally. It's so interesting because like they start off the trailer kind of leaning into like the very comedic elements, and obviously there were elements of that in the first movie. Feel however you want to feel about the movie. I personally enjoyed it, but I do know there are quite a few people who did not, and that's fine or whatever. But it's just interesting to me that like to continue seeing like Venom depicted this way is so interesting, because most versions of Venom, as someone who's never read the comics, because I'm sure there's varying different depictions of Venom, but more often than not when I see Venom, whether it be in video games and animated series and stuff like that, is very like typically darker and more serious in a lot of cases. Yes, there have been elements even amongst those where they've kind of dabbled in like adding comedic elements to Venom. One that kind of comes to my mind is like the first, like I don't remember the name of the game. I think it had a subtitle, I don't remember. It was the PS1 SpiderMan game that had like that Venom had some comedic elements to him, like, you know, so it kind of makes me kind of think of that. But it's just interesting to kind of lean into that, and obviously continuing this very like buddy cop comedy that the first one kind of was, kind of continuing that, and just them being, you know, just like, oh hi Mr. Chen, oh hi Eddie, hi Venom. It's just like the most casual thing in the world, you know. And I think it's so interesting because I'm sure people are going to feel different ways about it, have felt different ways about it. But I obviously, in this universe, Venom being an anti-hero, eventually he gets to that in a lot of storylines, but usually he starts off full-blown villain and then becomes, you know, an anti-hero. But now he just kind of starts as an anti-hero and kind of continues down that path. But from what we could get from the story so far, it's interesting because the trailer hits some of the movie plots while still kind of keeping us in the dark about certain aspects. But obviously, it seems like they're leaning into like the fact is of like there's a lot of victims of Cletus's that aren't known, either whether it's like, oh, you don't know where the bodies are, or you don't know the fact is that there's been some murders that have taken place that you're just not aware of have taken place. And obviously, he's being executed. We even see the detective who is working the case. I'm assuming he's the detective who originally arrested Cletus. We'll find out in the movie whether or not that ends up being the case or not. But obviously it seems like Eddie's kind of working that side of things too, and that kind of brings him back into Cletus, back into his life. But when Cletus is getting executed, at first they're like you know, lethal injection, but then at one point in time you see like the red from inside of him go into like the tube. So it's like, I guess he had already been infected by Carnage at some point in time. How and when? Because part of me was wondering like, was it slipped in during like the lethal injection? But like I said, at least from what they show in the trailer, it was inside of him and then went into the tube, not in the tube and goes inside of him. So like I said, not unless they kind of cut that out of the trailer just to kind of hide that, but who knows? Obviously going full-blown Carnage and everything, no surprise. There was a lady inside of a box at that place. It's called Ravencroft. I don't know whether that's the same facility or there's a different one, but she has like a scar on her eyes. Her eyes are kind of bluish. It almost looks like maybe her, like she's blind, but it looked like her pupils were okay. It's just like the irises of her eye were like bluish. So I don't know. Part of me was wondering, is she like a remnant of Riz Ahmed's character's like experiments from the first movie, or you know, is someone continuing that research? I think she's another symbiote, because, or symbiote. I'm basing that simply because like at one point during the trailer you see her screaming, and I think one of the symbiotes has that like as a special ability, because obviously they bring it up, obviously we know there's an entire planet of them, so I guess we're getting more. So like that's what makes me think this might be more of Riz Ahmed's like experiments and the aftermath of that, or it might be, like I said, someone else kind of doing their own thing. So I think we're going to get multiples, because at one point, like when I think when he kind of goes full-blown Carnage and escapes, like we see like a fire and everything, like I think the place is on fire, and we see a larger shadow walking and then a smaller one. So I'm wondering, did like she or like did both of them break out at the same time? I'm interested to kind of, you know, find out more on that front. This also does present an interesting thing, because he is an anti-hero. It does make you wonder, because eventually they're going to cross paths. Like, what does this mean for like Spider-Man? It makes you wonder like how like Tom Holland's Spider-Man and Tom Hardy's Venom, like what that's going to look like, because it's not going to be necessarily the adversarial relationship I'm used to and most people are used to. I mean, there's like decades of comics of like that adversarialism, and obviously like there have been times they've joined forces, sure, but it's still just going to be like we're not going to get that them being the adversary, because Venom is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains, so not to have that dynamic is going to be interesting. I'm not too upset about it, because it's like, hey, you do what you want to with it. This is kind of your thing to kind of adapt and do what you want with it. Like, we've had plenty of examples of them being enemies. What they look like in this universe is going to be really interesting. So how they kind of tie everything ultimately together is going to be fascinating in its own right. But I did like that conversation that Cletus is kind of having with Eddie, where he's talking about we're both the same, because when it comes to the people we leave behind, it was basically like, it's also about like how we left them behind, like, you know, because those, like, what kind of damage or what kind of issues did we leave them with when we left them, what kind of questions we kind of leave them with. At least that's kind of like my interpretation of it. So like I said, it's going to be interesting, like I said, blending this like comedic tone with, I think, a very dark and serious tone when you get Cletus. But Cletus is a sociopath, psychopath. I always flip-flop on those words because there is a difference. But I'm curious, like, they could still lean into the comedic element. It'd be a very, like, dark comedic element if they decided to with Cletus. I think you can still lean into, like, just being darker there. It's going to be interesting to see, like, the full tone of this movie as they kind of bounce back and forth. Obviously, once again, we get glimpses of Eddie and Venom doing the whole, like, anti-hero thing of just kind of, like, dealing with bad guy. But obviously these are just some of my thoughts. I'd love to get to know yours in the comments down below. What are some things you want to see in this movie? What are some things you expect to see in this movie? Let me know your thoughts. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.